Well, hey, good morning, Hope City Church. How you guys doing this morning? You guys doing good? Come on, it's the 10:30. We slept in. We got caffeinated. Come on. Hey, super excited that I get to spend this morning with awesome people like you. Thank you for carving up time on a Sunday morning to be with us. Hey, my name is Justin. I'm the youth pastor here at Hope City. I got a quick question. Do we have any teenagers in the building this morning? Make yourself known. Give me a little woo. Give me a little woo if you're a teenager. Come on, don't be shy. Yeah. Hey. Teenagers, listen, I know normally we've got our own thing, but listen, don't tune out. I want you to lean in. I've got a message for you this morning. It's going to apply to you. I believe that God's going to speak to you this morning. Hey, if you're new here, thank you so much that you would choose to be with us this morning. We'd love to connect with you. We say it a lot, but we really do mean it. Like we care. We want to connect. So stop by in the lobby at the New Here booth, and we'd love to connect with you. And so we are in week 4 of a series that we've titled Divine Direction. And last week, Pastor Peter talked all about prayer. And he talked about how prayer moves the heart of God. He said this, he said, when we pray on a regular basis, irregular things happen. If you missed it, go grab it on the podcast. You can find that at Hope City SRQ. It was so good. But this week, I've got the privilege to speak to you guys on the topic of wisdom. So I just want to be really transparent with you guys this morning. It might get a little bit awkward up in here. Amanda and I have been having some marital issues, and no matter how hard we've tried recently, like we just can't seem to figure this thing out, right? It's this one thing. It just keeps popping up, and we've had some serious, heated conversations about this one thing. In fact, last week when we left church, and it seems like whenever we leave church, it just makes its way back in. And so last week, it popped back up. And as soon as we got in the car, I was like, boom, there it is. And we're like, all right, we're going to have to deal with this thing again. And here's how it normally starts. It normally starts with one of us. It doesn't really matter which one. But we say something along the lines of, man, I'm so hungry. And then the other one looks at the other and responds, well, where do you want to eat? And so I normally go, I've got like 2 places that I'm down to eat, like at any given point. And so I say, well, what about Five Guys? I get down on a burger, you know what I'm saying? Let me get that bacon cheeseburger. Let's go. And Amanda will normally respond with, I don't really want a burger. And so I'm like, okay, no burger. All right, we can go like two stores over. What about Chipotle? You want to go to Chipotle? Right now, I've got a bone to pick with some of you guys. I've noticed that some of you guys call it Chipotle, but I just want to make it very clear that there's an L at the end of the word Chipotle, and so it's Chipotle, not Chipotle. Okay, I just had to get that off my chest. And so I said, hey, you want to go to Chipotle? And she'd go, we just had Chipotle like the other day, and I'll be like, that was like 2 weeks ago. And she'd be like, still, I don't want Chipotle. And then I hit her with that question. And this is like, at this point, things are starting to really heat up. Like, okay, so what do you want then? And she's like, I don't really care. In fact, we just have somebody to follow us around, right? We've got real life footage from this conversation. Check it out.
There is no easy way. No matter what I do, somebody gets hurt.
Would you stop thinking about what everyone wants? Stop thinking about what I want, what he wants, what your parents want. What do you want? What do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want?
I'm sitting in the car, and I'm like, what do you want? And she's like, it's not that simple. And I'm like, yes, it is. Just pick one, please. Right? Because at this point, what happens is hunger begins to blend in with this thing called anger, and you begin to feel what's called hangry, right? And who knows, when you're driving around and you're hungry and you're angry, you're just like, oh, I'm about to pull over, and we were going to sit here until we figure out where we want to go. Because at this point, I don't know where I'm going. We're not going to Five Guys. We're not going to Chipotle. We would go to Chick-fil-A, but hey, it's Sunday, so Lord's Day, right? And so now at this point, we're just driving around aimlessly. I don't know about you guys, but man, sometimes life can feel like that. It can feel like we're just driving around aimlessly. Man, I don't know about you, but sometimes it can be so difficult for me to make decisions, right? Whether it's silly things like where are we going for lunch after church, or man, what are we going to watch on Netflix, right? You ever spend like 30 minutes looking for something on Netflix, and then you're like, oh, it's 9:30, I better go to bed, right? Right? Or maybe it's something big, right? Like moving to a different state to take a job, right? It's hard to decide. But the decisions we make, they're important. I want to stress that. And here's the reason why. Because of the decisions that we make today will determine the stories that we tell tomorrow. Decisions are important because we make our decisions and then our decisions make us. And if we're being honest, if we're being real, a lot of us, most of us would say that, yeah, we struggle with making decisions. I mean, we struggle with making decisions about different things, but we all struggle with making decisions. I think there's many, many reasons as to why, but I've kind of pinpointed two that I think might be kind of some primary culprits. One of them is that we have an unlimited number of options. Man, back in the day when it came to TV, you only had a few channels. Right, back in my day, I would watch Saturday morning cartoons on Kids WB. That was my jam. That's what I would watch, right? And then nowadays, it's like cable is just completely extinct. It just doesn't even exist anymore. And we've got thousands of different options right at our fingertips. And we can't decide because we have too many options. We're like, man, I just don't know which one to pick, right? Another reason why I think that we struggle to make decisions is because something that's called the illusion of perfection. There used to be a time when somebody went on vacation and you didn't know about it till they got back, if you ever knew about it at all. Nowadays, it's like, hashtag just booked a vacay, hashtag Honolulu, what's up Hawaii, right? It's like you know the moment they book it, and you're like, I want a vacation. Can I go on a vacation? Right? And so they post it on social media. But the thing about social media is, man, that's the sports center for life. What do I mean by that? It's just a bunch of highlights, right? It's curated. You only see what people want you to see. The problem is we begin to compare people's highlights to our behind the scenes. And we start to feel inferior, inadequate, and we start to feel like maybe the decisions we've made in our life aren't as good as that person's decisions because they're driving a Bugatti and they're going on vacations and that's just the greatest mom on the planet, right? And so we begin to compare ourselves. It's the illusion of perfection. Now, maybe you're here, you're like, well, I'm not really on social media, so I really don't connect with that. You'll connect with this. Because it's not only true for social media, it's also true when it comes to our relationship with God, right? We want what? The perfect will of God, right? Maybe you've thought this once upon a time. Maybe you've said this. You said, I know God's got the one out there for me, and one day I'm going to meet the one, and I'm going to marry the one, and it's all going to be rainbows and unicorns. We're going to live happily ever after. Well, what happens if you marry the wrong one, right? You marry the wrong one. You start to wonder, like, okay, God, I just married the wrong one. You're going to have to work with me here. We just didn't get this right. It's hard to make decisions. This entire series, we've hung it up on this verse. It's Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9. I want to read it to you guys this morning. It says this: we can make our plans. Now, I don't know about you, but, man, I like to make plans, right? Like, I've got plans tonight. I'm taking a team of incredible volunteers. We're going to Youth Pastor Summit in Orlando, and we're going to spend the next few days in breakout sessions and getting poured into. Like, we've got plans, right? You got some plans. I've got some plans. We love to make plans, but check out the second half of this verse. It says, but the Lord determines our steps. I think too often we're like, okay, God, listen, this is my 5-year plan. I'm going to do this, and this. And God is like, listen, just focus on today. Just take the next step. Focus on today. And we're like, but God, I got plans, right? It's hard to make decisions. The fear of making an imperfect decision is very real, right? We're like, well, what if it's not the perfect decision, right? And it can be crippling, right? And we ask these questions when we're trying to make a decision that's big. How do we know that that's what God wants us to do? Should I take this job? Should I move my family to another state? Should we keep renting or should we buy? My landlord goes to our church, and she came up to me after last service. She was like, hey, the Lord just spoke to me. You should keep renting. I was like, hey, you're right. I should. I'm not ready yet. And we're like, hey, God, tell me what you want. I'm here. I'm your guy. I'm your girl. Just tell me show me what to do, and I'll do it. Show me what to do. Lay it all out, and then I'll just do it. And we get this idea that when we choose to follow God, when we choose to follow Jesus, he's going to show us exactly what it is he wants us to do. But that's not always true. Right? You're not always going to have certainty. You're not always going to know without a shadow of a doubt that that's what you're supposed to do. You're not always going to know what's to come. And even the Apostle Paul, somebody who's arguably one of the greatest church planners to ever live, understood this. We don't have the slides, but I'm going to read it to you. 1 Corinthians 16, 6 through 9, it says this: perhaps I will stay with you for a while. Perhaps. Come on, Paul, this is Mr. Church Planner, I wrote most of the New Testament. Perhaps. You just got to make a decision, man. You got to know what you're doing. Or even spend the winter so that you can help me on my journey wherever I go. Now, I don't know about you, but man, if you're going to plant a church, you better know where you're going to plant a church. You can't just be like, I think I'll plant a church there. And I think I'll plant a church there. This stuff is hard work. Man, it drains you. You give everything. And he's like, wherever I'll go. For I do not want to see you now and make only a passing visit. I hope to spend some time with you if the Lord permits. But I will stay on at Ephesus until Pentecost because a great door for effective work has opened to me. And there are many who oppose me. So often when we're making decisions, we want God to show us the way. But God doesn't always do that. We say, God, show me the way. And God says, no. I'm not going to show you the way. I'm going to give you wisdom to discern. King Solomon was somebody in the Bible that understood the significance of wisdom. Back then, it was tradition to sacrifice one bull to God. And King Solomon said, no. That's not extravagant enough for God. That's not big enough for God. I'm going to sacrifice 1,000 bulls. And so Solomon makes this sacrifice to God, and God's heart is moved because God's heart is moved by generosity. And so God responds to Solomon and he says, hey, I'll give you whatever it is you want. What do you want, Solomon? You ask it, I'll give it, right? And you know what Solomon didn't ask for? Solomon didn't ask for wealth. He didn't ask for power. He didn't ask for fame. He didn't ask for the head of his enemies. Let me ask you this morning, if God said to you, personally, whatever you want, you can have it, what would you say? God says, I'll give you whatever it is you want. Just ask, and I'll give it. Would you ask for money? Man, I don't know about you, but I could certainly use a little bit more money, right? Would you ask for influence? Maybe you want influence with your peers and with your coworkers and with your boss and in your industry. Maybe you want influence. I would ask for influence. I don't know. I don't know if you were king of a big land. I don't know. Maybe you'd want to build a wall around your land. I don't know. What would you ask for? If God said, hey, you could have anything you want. Let me tell you what Solomon asked for. Solomon asked God, he said, would you help me make good and faithful decisions? Would you give me wisdom? And you know what God did? God honored that he asked for wisdom, and he said, you know what? I'm not only going to give you wisdom, but I'm going to give you wealth. I'm going to give you power. I'm going to give you fame. I'm going to give you all these things too because you've asked me for wisdom. See, Solomon understood that about wisdom, and that's why he wrote this in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7. Getting wisdom is the wisest thing you can do. Wisest thing you can do. And whatever else you do, develop good judgment. Get good wisdom. Develop good judgment. I've heard this said so many times, and maybe you said it before in your life. It's like, if I knew then what I know now, oh boy, if I knew then what I know now. And the reason we say that is because what we're really saying is, I've gotten some wisdom along the way, right? I've made some mistakes. I've stepped in some junk, and I've tracked it all through my life. I've got some wisdom. And if I could go back, I would change some things. I would make some different decisions because of the wisdom that I've gotten along the way. We say, God, show me what to do. Just show me what to do and I'll do it. And God says, I'm not going to show you what to do. I'm going to give you wisdom to discern. And so I want to ask and answer two questions. I'm going to phrase it in two ways. Here are the questions. How do we avoid driving through life aimlessly? How do we get from point A to point B to point C to point D? How do we get through life without driving aimlessly? Or better put, how do we discern God's divine direction in our lives? I want to give you three thoughts, super simple thoughts. They're rooted in Scripture. And I believe that it could help you make some hard decisions. They're simple. I'm telling you, like, this stuff's not rocket science. You've heard it before. You know it. But you know what? We all could use some reminders every now and again. The first one is you need to walk. You go ahead and write that down. The first one is walk. You just need to walk. Proverbs 13:20, it says this: walk with the wise and become wise. Makes sense? For a companion of fools suffers harms. You want to walk with, if you walk with the wise, you'll become wise. You walk with a fool, you'll become a fool. When I look back on my teenage years, you know, when I look back and I recognize all the moments that I got in trouble, the reason I got in trouble was because I was hanging out with trouble. You know what I'm saying? I was hanging out with trouble. And we all know those people. We've seen those people where when they get together, you're like, oh, man, here comes trouble. Right? For me, back when I was a teenager, that was my buddy Peter. Whenever him and I got together, man, we got in trouble. You knew something was about to go down. My mom's on the front row. This is going to be hilarious because she's going to remember this. I'll never forget one weekend in particular. I'm so sorry, Mom. I gave you that gray hair. Him and I walked up to the corner store, grabbed some soda, some snacks. And when we came out, there was a group of grown men waiting out there. And let me tell you, they didn't want to talk to us. They weren't there to talk to us. Peter got into an altercation with somebody a few days prior to me coming up. I was like 13 at the time. He's a little bit older than me. And they wanted payback for that. And so I walk out and I start like shaking in my boots. I'm like, oh no. And so I said to Peter, Peter, call Champ. That name. Let's talk about that. What I really should have said in this moment was Peter, call your parents. No, instead, 13-year-old Justin thinks it's a good idea to tell Peter to call Champ. Let me let you know. Champ was a member of the Crips gang. Homeboy had like 3 teardrop tattoos on his face. And in this moment, I'm like, call Champ. And so Champ and this other guy, they pull up in a truck. And this other guy hops out. He goes to the back of the truck. And he pulls out like this huge steel pipe. And they come over to us, and they're like, you guys just need to get in the back of the truck and lay down. Pause for a moment. Listen, the very, 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 very last thing that 13-year-old Justin needs to do in this moment is get in the back of this truck with the gang member Champ and his buddy. I shouldn't get in this truck. Play. So I go ahead and get in the truck. And I lay down in the truck. I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to lay down. I have no idea why I'm laying down, but I'm going to lay down because that seems like the right thing to do. And over in the distance, an undercover cop watches all this go down, and he's like, yeah, that's sketchy. So here we are, laying in the back of the truck. When all of a sudden we hear whoop, whoop, and we see like lights, and I'm like, okay, don't move. If we don't move, maybe the well-trained police officers won't think to look in the back of the truck. There's no way they'd think. We're totally going to fool them. Boom, flashlight in the face, get out. All right? They put us in cuffs. They put us on the side of the road. And long story short, when they searched the car, they found drugs and a loaded gun in the glove box. And because of the decisions that Champ had made, that landed him in cuffs and in the back of a cop car. Me, I was on the curb in handcuffs till my mom drove 45 minutes to come get me out. Because when the cops discovered the story, they realized, okay, these kids are just along for the ride. But let me tell you, can you imagine if they decided, we've got a loaded gun in this car, we're not stopping. We're not pulling over. Here we are, a bunch of 13-year-olds in the back of a truck. We could be dead. We could have lost our lives that day. Walk with the wise. Become wise. For a companion of fools suffers harms. That's just one story from my teenage years. I have many. And the reason is because I surrounded myself with the wrong people. I surrounded myself with people who made foolish decisions. And when I got saved at 17 and I got called to ministry, that's the reason why. Because I look back on my teenage years and I see all these bad decisions that I made. And I felt like, you know what, I want to dedicate my life to helping teenagers not make those same decisions that I made. And not only do I want to help them make good decisions, but I want to help them make God decisions. Right? I want to help them make God-honoring decisions, guys. Thank you. Walk with the wise, become wise. Walk with the fools, become a fool. Who are you walking with? Who's in your life? You know, some of us here, we desperately want to grow in our faith. We want to take the next step. We're like, God, I just want to take this thing to the next level, right? Some of us here, we've got hurts. We've got habits. We've got hang-ups, and we're like, man, I just want to push through this, but every time, I try to get through it, it's like I fall back into it, right? We've got these things, and here's the thing, we want to take that next step, right? But we're not surrounding ourselves with people who are actively themselves trying to take the next step, right? We're surrounding ourselves with fools, with people who aren't, right? And you're finding yourself stuck where you're at because you haven't surrounded yourself with the right people. Walk with the wise, become wise. Teenagers in the room, let me talk to you for a minute. Lean in. I know I tell you guys this a lot. I tell you guys this so often that you're going to be like, you probably repeat this to me. But look, show me your friends. I'll show you your future. Be wise about who you call friend. You got some people in your life that you call friend, but they'll quickly lead you astray. When push comes to shove, they won't be there for you. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Walk with the wise, become wise. I didn't say it, Solomon did. Who are you walking with? Here at Hope City, we say this all the time. The most meaningful moments of life are when we're meaningfully connected to God and others. Let me ask you, are you in a connect group? Look, I know we're halfway through, but you can still jump in. Find one, jump into one. Get yourself surrounded with not just good people, but God people that are chasing after God, right? Because as you walk with them and you begin to chase after God together, right, it'll take you forward, right? Walk with the wise, become wise. The first thing is walk. The second thing you'll want to write down, and the second thing you need to do is ask. You want to promise for a prayer that God will always answer. Ask for wisdom. James 1:5 says this, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. When you ask God for wisdom, he says yes. God, can I have wisdom? He says, yep. Anytime you ask God for wisdom, he gives it. Okay? How does God give wisdom? He gives us wisdom when we're connected with him every day through his word. God will give us wisdom through the people that we surround ourselves with. Right? He'll give you wisdom through your connect group. When you're walking with the wise, you'll become wise. God will give you wisdom through your circumstances. What circumstances are you in right now? What are you going through right now? Could God be trying to teach you? What can you learn from your circumstances? The other day, I was having a conversation with our teens about the difference between guilt and conviction. And what I said to them was guilt leads to shame. And what shame does is it causes us to hide. It causes us to just curl in and turn, and it causes us to go into secrecy, right? And we hide from God. Our mistakes, we cover them up, and ultimately what it does, guilt leading to shame, it pulls us farther away from God. But conviction, something totally different. Conviction leads to action, right? Instead of shrinking back and hiding and covering up, right? We're going to decide, hey, you know what? I'm going to reveal this mistake I made. I'm going to own it. Right, and what that does when we own it, when we take what we've put in the dark and we bring it to the light, because that's what conviction does. It takes what's in the dark and it helps us bring it to the light. You know what happens? We become closer to God, right? It's the opposite. And I had a teenager lean in, and he goes, so when you say reveal it, are you saying that I should, if I've done something that's causing me to experience guilt, that I should tell my parents? Right, for a teenager, when you've done something wrong, you're like, I don't want to tell my parents because I don't want to get grounded. They're going to take away Fortnite. They're going to limit all my apps, right? Like there's this fear that's rooted. And I said, well, let me ask you this, bud. What do you do with a splinter? Do you leave it in? And he said, no, you pull it out. And I said, don't leave that guilt in. Pull it out. I saw the parent this past week, and they said, you won't believe this. My son came to me and told me this deep, dark secret that he'd kept. And they ended up having this phenomenal conversation about it, right? And they're able to move forward. And it's all simply because a 13-year-old decided that he wanted to lean in and ask for wisdom. If a 13-year-old can ask for wisdom and act on it, you can ask for wisdom and act on it. And let me tell you, ask for wisdom, and it'll be given. I'm so proud of him for doing that. It's incredible. But let me ask you this. What are you facing this right now that you need wisdom for? Maybe you have a relationship with a friend or a family member that's on the rocks. Can I tell you, ask God for wisdom. Maybe you have a big financial decision that you need to make. Maybe it's a big decision that has to do with your business. right? Big decision. Let me tell you what to do. When you have a big decision, you need to seek God in a big way. Ask God for wisdom. When I applied to be the youth pastor of Hope City Church, I wasn't really sure what God was doing. I knew that God was stirring my heart a little bit and was maybe beginning to call me back to Florida. It's how we figured it out. Well, I'm not really sure. Let's figure this thing out. And so I applied, and what happened was we ended up with a lot of questions. We had a lot of unknowns, and we had a lot of things that we needed wisdom for, right? We're asking questions like, man, should we really uproot ourselves and move? What you got to know is my first job didn't really work out all that well. It just wasn't a good fit. I wasn't there for very long. My second youth pastor job, I wasn't there for very long either, and it was the one I just left. And so I'm at this place where I'm like, man, if this doesn't work out, that's it for me, right? It's like, whew. There's a lot of questions. We weren't sure. And so we spent about 5 months going through the interview process. 5 months of Pastor Peter and I having conversations, and me having conversations with the overseers at the church, and 5 months of walking with the wise, 5 months of asking God for wisdom, and then finally I was offered the position, and I said, Peter, how long do I have? Right? And it's like an awkward situation to be in. Like, you don't want to force somebody, but it's like, hey, we do kind of want to know. And I said, can you give me until like Wednesday next week? And he goes, absolutely. Because Peter's just amazing like that. And let me tell you, I used up every single, I'm talking about, it was like 10 seconds left on the clock. Like, I'm sitting in my office, and I'm like just sitting there mulling over this thing. And my associate pastor at the time, he walks in, and he can just see it on face, right? And he's like, what's wrong? And it's one of those moments where I'm like, really? You want to know what's wrong? You know what's wrong. And I'm like, I'm trying to make this decision, man. Should I stay here in Detroit? Right? I love you guys. I love this church. Or should we go back to Florida? And he goes, Justin, let me ask you this. He goes, you're overcomplicating this. Let me make this simple for you. If you stay in Detroit, are you going to serve God? And I was like, yeah. He goes, if you move to Florida, are you going to serve God? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, well, then what's the problem? It doesn't matter where you go, you're going to honor God. Make a decision. Spoiler alert, we made a decision. We're here. And it was an incredible decision. But let me tell you, I'm sitting there mulling, and sometimes we think it's like this overcomplicated process. And sometimes it's really like, hey, do you want to honor God? Yes, I do. Okay. Then God's going to be cool if you stay in Detroit, and God's going to be cool if you go to Florida, right? It's one of those things where God's like, I'm just going to honor that. But you have to ask. You'll never know if you don't ask, right? If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. Here's the deal. In order to get wisdom from God, you've got to spend time with God. The two go hand in hand. So often we want to get that wisdom from God, but we don't really want to spend some time with God, right? But that's the only way relationships grow. Your strongest, deepest rooted relationships are with people that you've spent a significant amount of time with. And it's the same way with God. That's why we're told we got to seek him first every single day. Let me give you a prayer. Wake up. Pray this. Say, God, will you align my heart? Ask God to align your heart. Ask God to help you see what he wants you to see. Ask God to help you hear what he wants you to hear. Ask God to say what he wants you to say. If you want wisdom from God, you've got to spend time with God. Ask him, and he'll give it to you. Some of you, you're here, and you're new to faith. You're just kind of kicking the tires. You're walking around the car, and you're like, man, I don't really know about this whole faith thing. Or maybe you're here, and you've grown up in church, and you've got a church background, but you kind of grew up in a dysfunctional church, and you've got a stale taste in your mouth about who you think God is. And what I want to do this morning is I actually want to point you to a passage that talks about who God is, because this is who God is. It doesn't matter what any man says God is. This is who God says he is. Check this out. The Lord says, I will guide you along the best pathway for your life. God is a person who he's gonna guide you along what? The best pathway for your life. Not second best, not third best, not leftovers, the very best. Right? What will he do? I will advise you and watch over you. That's God. When you seek him for wisdom, that's how he responds. I have a little girl. Her name's Rowan. We call her Ro. That's a picture of her and I. She's about 2 years old, going on 22 years old. This girl is larger than life. Like, she's 2 feet, but man, she's got a 10-foot personality. You know what I'm saying? Like, she's got a huge personality. And so we live, our place, it's a second story like condo, and we've got these stairs, and we open the door that we have to walk up. And she's getting to this point where she just insists on walking up the stairs by herself. Right? And what do? Right? I'm like, okay, you're tiny. You can't even reach, like, you put your hand on the wall as you go. It's the silliest looking thing. But she wants to. And so she'll sit there and she'll look at me and she's like, can I go upstairs like you guys? Right? And so I let her. Right? Maybe you're here, you're like, she's so little. She's tiny. Aren't you afraid she's going to fall and hurt herself? And my answer is no, I'm not, because I'm her daddy. You think I'm going to let that happen? As she's climbing those stairs, you think I'm going to let her fall back? I am not going to let her hit the ground. Because if she falls and she loses her balance, I'm going to be right there to catch her. And whether she knows it or not, I am there every step of the way. Right? She's climbing those stairs. I'm there. What am I doing? I'm guiding her. Right? I'm right there. You got this, girl. You got this. Right? We're almost there, girl. She'll get out of breath. You know, it's the funniest little thing. I'm like, oh, poor girl. Me too. Right? And so she's out of breath. And I'm like, look, I'm gonna advise you, and I'm gonna watch over you. We get to the top of the stairs. Yeah. Right? We rue, and she goes, yay. You know, and she claps. I'm like, you did it, girl. Right? Some of us, man, we're so worried we're going to fall that we won't even climb the stairs. You're just sitting there at the bottom of the stairs and you're like, I just don't know if I can do this, right? What if I make the wrong decision? What if I do the wrong thing? Don't you know that God is a heavenly Father? He's not going to let you fall. He's not going to let you hit the ground. He's right there. Every step of the way, he will guide you. He will advise you, and he will watch over you. If you have to make a decision, let me tell you, walk with the wise. Ask God for wisdom. And then finally, you just got to make a decision. Third point of the message, you can write this down, is you just simply need to decide. Decisions are difficult. What if I make an imperfect decision? We're so afraid of an imperfect decision that we make no decision. Can I tell you, no decision is so much worse than an imperfect decision? So often we're like, oh man, how do I know? How do I know if it's God opening the door or if it's Satan opening an elevator shaft and when I step through it, I'm going to fall? We're like, I don't know. Is this God's will or my will? I don't know. You have to decide that. He gave you the freedom to decide. That's why he gave you the freedom to decide. He could have made you a robot, but then you do exactly what he wants you to do. You see, you got to understand something about God. God wants to be loved. He wants to be worshipped, so he gave us the freedom to choose to do that. So God, I sought you for advice. I've walked with the wise. Now, make a decision. And I don't mean to sound unspiritual up here. I leave it to the youth pastor to do that. But too often we get this idea that like the clouds are going to like, right? And like there's going to be a voice, a thundering voice, like eat 5 guys, right? Like there's this voice that's going to come down and tell us what to do. But I'm telling you, sometimes, no. Sometimes it's literally that conversation that I had with my associate pastor where he asks me, do you want to honor God with the decision you're making? And I say, yes. Okay, then do it. Right? Sometimes you just need to make a decision. And you know what? Don't take my word for it. Look at what the Apostle Paul says. 1 Thessalonians 3:1. He says this. So when we could stand it no longer, we thought it best to be left by ourselves in Athens. I'm not sure. God didn't say. We prayed. We walked with the wise and we made a decision. We thought it best. Was it best? I don't know. We thought it best. So we went with it. Well, what if I make a mistake? Well, what happens if you make a mistake? What do you get? You get wisdom. You might also get an extra bill or maybe an extra kid. But nonetheless, you still get wisdom. Right? Too often we're like, okay, God, just show me what to do. Show me what to do. You show me what to do and I'll do it. And God is like, hey, I'm not going to show you what to do, but I'm going to give you wisdom to discern. Let me ask you this morning, what decision are you facing that you need wisdom for? Some of you here this morning, you need to find people to walk with. You've been doing this thing alone. people you're going to, they're not chasing after God. And I'm sure they're good people. But there's just some things in life we don't need advice from good people. We need advice from God people. We need advice from people who are chasing after Jesus with everything they've got. Right? Don't take that advice from the people that aren't. Take the advice from the people that are. You need to get yourself surrounded by some God-loving people. Walk with the wise. Become wise. Others of you, you got to start asking God for wisdom. And it's got to be on other times other than Sunday. Man, we need to let God into our Monday through Saturday. We need to give that to God and say, God, just give us wisdom. Let me tell you, turn your drive time into prayer time. You going from point A to point B, put on some worship music, right? Get that hill song on. You know what I'm saying? Just get your vibe. You'll look like a crazy person at the stoplight, like hands raised, singing, right? But you turn your drive time into prayer time and you start seeking God. You start asking God for wisdom. You might leave for work stressed out, get to work and be like, I got it. I figured it out because I turned my drive time into pray time, right? Ask God for wisdom. And maybe you're here and you just need to pull the trigger. You've been mulling over this thing. And right now you're starting to grow stuff like out of your ears because you're so stressed out about this thing. You look, if you've walked with the wise, okay, move to the next step. Ask God for wisdom. Now, if you haven't been walking with the wise, don't make a decision yet. You need to go seek some wise people. Maybe you're like, man, I don't really want to ask them because I know what they're going to say. Well, if you know what they're going to say, then hello. You got to ask God for wisdom, and then you just need to make a decision. Decide. What is that thing for you? What is it? Can I challenge you this week? Take a next step. Walk with the wise. Ask God for wisdom. And then decide. Too often we're like, God, show me what to do. God says, I'm not going to show you what to do, but I'm going to give you wisdom to discern. Let's pray.